Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Recall Made Easy, and I hope that this series has helped you with giving different approaches that can be applied in order to recollect content in your UPSC preparation. In this episode, let us focus on the British Acts from 1773 to 1947. So basically in this episode, I'm going to teach you an evolutionary approach in order to recollect content. Evolutionary approaches, when you start from one point and when you go to another point, you have to see how the evolution has happened. If you have seen the evolution happening sequence by sequence, you will not forget it and you can recollect the content anytime. And that is what we are going to apply in this episode of Recall Made Easy, and that is the episode 5 where we discuss all the British Acts from 1773 to 1947. So I hope you people are ready for it. So let us start off. Alright guys, now what I want you to do is, I want you to write down all the important acts from Regulating Act 1773 to the Indian Independence Act 1947. I want you to write down all these acts in one page, so that when we discuss the evolutionary approach, you can visualize the entire evolution by just looking at that one page. So it is very important that you write all the acts in one page. Let me also do it for you. So we will write all the acts in one page so that when we look at this page, we should be able to visualize the evolution from Regulating Act 1773 to Indian Independence Act 1947. Okay. So basically it starts with the Regulating Act of 1773. Then comes the Pitt India Act of 1784. Then comes the Act of 1786. Then comes the Charter Act of 1793. Then comes the Charter Act of 1813. Then comes the Charter Act of 1833. Then comes the Charter Act of 1853. Then comes the Government of India Act 1858. Then comes the Indian Councils Act of 1861. Then comes the Indian Councils Act of 1892. Then comes the Indian Councils Act of 1909. This is what is called as Minto-Morley reforms. Then comes the Government of India Act of 1919. This is what is called Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Then comes the Government of India Act 1935. Then comes the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Okay. So basically what we have done, we have started with Regulating Act 1773 and we have gone up to Indian Independence Act 1947. Now you will understand why some acts are called Charter Acts, why are some acts called Government of India Act. So you will understand when we are discussing it. But what is very important is write all these acts in one page, and when we discuss the entire acts from Regulating Act to Indian Independence Act, you will understand the evolution that has happened, and by visualizing the sequence of evolution from here to there, that is how you are going to recollect the content of all British acts. But what I can assure is, if you can use this methodology of evolutionary approach, you don't have to by heart at all. You will know exactly the sequence of evolution that in turn will help you to recollect the content much faster. Okay. So this is how we start with the evolutionary approach. Now let us go one by one. I will start discussing one by one what are the different features and how things evolve from one act to another. So let us start off. The first is Regulating Act 1773. Regulating Act of 1773. Okay. If we have to understand the Regulating Act 1773, we have to understand what happened before 1773 which led to this particular act. So you should understand the context that has happened before. For that, we have to go back to the Battle of Buxar. In Battle of Buxar, that is 1764, this was a battle that took place between British on one side versus the Triple Alliance of Sujauddaulah. He was the Nawab of Awadh. Then you have Mir Qasim, Nawab of Bengal, Mir Qasim, and then you had Shah Alam II. Shah Alam II was the Mughal emperor. Okay. So this battle happened between the British and the Triple Alliance of Sujauddaulah, Mir Qasim and Shah Alam. In this particular battle, the British will come victorious, whereas the Triple Alliance will get defeated. So from this battle, the outcome of this battle was the British getting the grant of Diwani of Rights from Shah Alam II. So Shah Alam II will grant Diwani of Rights to the British. Where does he grant the Diwani of Rights? He grants the Diwani of Rights to the Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. So these are the three places where the British will get the rights of Diwani. Now understand what exactly is Diwani. Now if you take any territory, this territory will have two functions. One is Diwani rights, another is Nizamat rights. Okay. So whenever they say Diwani rights means it is the right to collect revenue. Nizamat rights means it is the right to protect law and order. Basically, it is a policing function. So when we say that the Shah Alam II granted Diwani of rights to British in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, basically the emperor is allowing the British to collect, the revenue. Okay. Then who is going to handle this Nizamat rights? The Nizamat right is going to be with the Nawab. Now this division of powers where revenue rights is going to the British and the Nawab is going to take care of the police and that is the law and order. This is what is called as dual government. This is what is called as dual government. There is one more concept called double government that comes in the future. We will discuss that, but this is what is called dual government. So this dual government was formed during the time of Robert Clive. Robert Clive was the one who fought the Battle of Buxar. So it was Robert Clive and during his tenure that the dual government was formed. Now this is a government where, look at this, the British had power and no responsibility. They had power but no responsibility, whereas the Nawab had responsibility, but no power. Look at this. This is the dichotomy that the dual government created. But the Britishers wanted that dichotomy because they just wanted the power, the money. They did not want any responsibility. So this dual government was favoring more of the Britishers. So this is the entire setup. Now coming to this regulating act. Before we go to the regulating act, understand that Warren Hastings, who will be the governor of Bengal, will abolish this dual government. Okay, he has abolished this dual government and now comes the Regulating Act of 1773. So listen very, very carefully. What are the changes that the Regulating Act 1773 introduces? The first one is Governor of Bengal is made the Governor General of Bengal. Look at this. They make the Governor of Bengal Governor General of Bengal. Why are they adding that word called Governor General? Is because they are making the Governor of Madras and the Governor of Bombay, subsidiary, or they make the Governor of Bengal and Governor of Bombay come under the authority of the Governor General of Bengal. Okay, so that is why they call the Governor of Bengal as Governor General of Bengal. Now along with this, what they do is they create an executive council. This executive council will be of 4 members and this executive council will help the Governor General in his decision making. And understand that the Governor General does not have overriding powers. The Governor General does not have the overriding powers. So that is what is the creation of this governance structure. So this is the structure created. The Governor of Bengal becomes the Governor General of Bengal and the Governor of Madras and Bombay are put under the Governor General of Bengal. There is an executive council of 4 members who will help in the decision making of the Governor General of Bengal. The Governor General of Bengal cannot override the decisions taken by the executive council. Okay. So overall this is the idea. But understand one more thing. They say that Regulating Act is the start of British Crown to control Indian territories managed by the East India Company. This is very, very important point. It is the start of the British Crown to control Indian territories managed by East India Company. Now, how is it the start of the British Crown to control the Indian territories managed by East India Company is, in this Regulating Act, they say that, look at this, East India Company is a trading company. Up to the Battle of Buxar, they will be a trading company. But the moment they get Diwani of Rights, they become an administrator in India. Because they can now collect revenue, they become an administrator. Okay. Now, this East India Company will have something called Court of Directors. So this Court of Directors are the ones who will help in taking decisions of the East India Company. So this regulating act, what does it do is, this regulating act will put a condition that this court of directors should regularly submit reports of political, civil, military and revenue matters to the British Crown regularly. So that condition that is put in the regulating act, that condition that is put on the court of directors, that they must report the civil, military, political and revenue matters regularly to the British Crown, that is why they say that regulating act is the start of the British Crown to control Indian territories managed by the East India Company. So overall, this is the essence of the Regulating Act 1773. Along with that, there is one more provision that is not that important, but the one more provision is Supreme Court is established in Calcutta. Now understand that when they say Supreme Court, it does not mean the Supreme Court that we have today. They are telling that the name has Supreme Court, but don't get confused with this Supreme Court and with whatever Supreme Court that we have today. Okay, so this is just the Supreme Court that is going to have the jurisdiction of Bengal. Okay, so this is what is the provisions of Regulating Act 1773. So you understood the governance structure. Now evolution of this governance structure will happen as we go from one act to another act, and hence you have to focus on this governance structure very, very carefully. Now let us go to the next act. So you understood the governance structure. Let us go to the next act. The next act is Pitt's India Act. Pitt's India Act 1784. Okay, so we have Pitt's India Act 1784. Now see, the Britishers, the British Crown will now say that the company's territories in India, are British possessions in India. British possessions in India. What this sentence means is that the British Crown is trying to assert more and more control over the Indian territories managed by the East India Company. Now see, in Pitt's India Act, they will go one step ahead and create what you call as double government. They will create what you call as double government. Now what is this double government? Look at this. You have East India Company. I told you that you have the court of directors. So the court of directors, the main idea is this court of directors will handle all the decisions of the East India Company. Now what the Pitt's India Act will do is, they will divide this East India Company into two groups, court of directors and then you have board of control. You have board of control. Now they say court of directors are in charge of making decisions that deals with commercial matters. So this is what they say for court of directors. For board of control, they say they are in charge of making decisions that mainly deals with political, civil, military matters. Political, civil and military matters. And look at this. The reason why they have divided like this is because this board of control, basically the nomination will definitely come from the British Crown. The British Crown will nominate the members into this. So invariably, the British Crown has now started interfering in the affairs of the East India Company because it wants the control of the Indian territories. Okay, that is why it says the company's territories in India are British possessions in India. Okay, and it takes control of the management of the East India Company by creating what you call as board of control and giving them the powers of political, civil and military matters. And this phenomena or this division of powers is what is called as double government. So this is the essence of the Pitt's India Act 1784. So you understood how the evolution has happened from Regulating Act 1773 to Pitt's India Act 1784. Okay, now let us move to the next act. Understand that in the next act, that is the Act of 1786. The Act of 1786. Now understand that here you have someone called Cornwallis. Cornwallis will be the Governor General of Bengal. Understand that he is a very, very important individual because he has introduced something called Cornwallis Code. There is judicial reforms that are done. There is civil service reforms. He brings in civil service reforms. Civil service, when we say civil service reforms, it is not helpful for Indians. So don't think like that. What he does is he creates what you call as covenanted civil services and he creates something called non-covenanted civil services. So he creates this two, bifurcation of civil services. This basically is position of high posts, whereas this non-covenanted is mainly clerical in nature. Okay, so what he says is he allows everyone to become civil servants under non-covenanted civil services, but this basically is reserved for the Britishers. This is reserved for the Britishers and sometimes for Europeans. Britishers and sometimes for Europeans. So that is why they say that Cornwallis resulted in Europeanization of Indian civil services. Why? Because this particular post was reserved only for the Britishers, okay, and sometimes for Europeans. So these are some things that Cornwallis does. However, Cornwallis was also a very good administrator from the British point of view. And because he was a very good administrator from the British point of view, not from Indian point of view, he was a very good administrator from British point of view. He demanded a few conditions. The first is, he demanded that, I told you that there is Governor General of Bengal with Executive Council of 4 members, correct? So what Cornwallis demands is, he should have overriding powers. He should have overriding powers of the decisions made by the Executive Council, overriding powers of the decisions made by the Executive Council in special matters or in special cases. So this is first condition that he does or that he keeps. The second condition that he keeps is, he should be named as the commander-in-chief. He should be named as the commander-in-chief. Okay. So basically he is putting up these two conditions. And what is Act of 1786 is? The 1786 is the British Crown accepts these conditions. The British Crown accepts these conditions. So this entire accepting of the conditions put forward by the Cornwallis, that is overriding powers of the decisions made by the Executive Council, plus to be named as Commander-in-Chief, this which gets accepted is what is called as Act of 1786. So from 1773 to 1784 to 1786, you have seen the evolution that is happening with the post of Governor General of Bengal, with the Executive Council, and what is happening inside the East India Company. These are some things that should run in your mind. Okay, so this is Act of 1786. Now listen, Act of 1793 is very, very closely related to this. So I'll write it here only. The Charter Act of 1793. Okay. Now understand that whenever they say Charter Act, it means that they are making changes in the Royal Charter given by the British Crown to the East India Company. So basically understand that Royal Charter means privileges. So the privileges that are given to the East India Company, the British Crown can make changes to it. So whatever changes that the British Crown will make in that particular privileges or Royal Charter, that changes will come in the form of Charter Act of different years. Okay. So we are going to discuss on Charter Act of 1793. So what Charter Act of 1793 does is, look at this, the two conditions which the British Crown had accepted for Cornwallis. Now in this Charter Act of 1793, these conditions will apply. These conditions will apply for all future Governor Generals of Bengal. Governor Generals of Bengal. So that is the first provision. That is, the overriding powers of the decisions taken by Executive Council in special cases is now forwarded to all Governor Generals of Bengal after Cornwallis, and they will also be named as Commander-in-Chief. So that is the first one. The second point is, now this East India Company is given 20 years extension of monopoly of trade. 20 years extension of monopoly of trade in India. Monopoly of trade in India. Okay. So these are the two important changes that the Charter Act of 1793 brings. Okay. Not that significant when it comes to the governance structure, but the main thing is whatever conditions that the Cornwallis had put, now these conditions will be accepted even for those Governor Generals who will come after Cornwallis. Okay. Apart from that, East Indian Company gets 20 years of monopoly extension. This also will keep evolving, so keep an eye on this. So this is Act of 1786 and Charter Act of 1793. Now let us learn about the Charter Act of 1813. Again, it is very interesting. Look at it. If you take the Charter Act of 1813, what you should understand is the pretext. Now, in the 1790s, France has undergone French Revolution, and the outcome of this French Revolution has resulted in the first emperor of France, and that is Napoleon. Okay. Now Napoleon is very aggressively running the military campaigns in Europe. Okay. Now the Britishers feel the threat of Napoleon, and because the British Crown feels the threat of Napoleon, that is one. The second is East India Company has rampant corruption. This is two. Because the British Crown is feeling the threat of Napoleon, and because the British Crown is also observing that there is rampant corruption in the East India Company, what the British Crown does is, the British Crown in the Charter Act of 1813, the British Crown asserts sovereignty of Indian territories sovereignty of Indian territories managed by the East India Company. Look at this and understand that they are just asserting the sovereignty. There is no transfer of power. It is still the East India Company that is managing the Indian territories. They are just telling that they assert the sovereignty. That means the British Crown asserts the sovereignty over Indian territories. The final decision maker will always be the British Crown when it comes to the British Indian territories. That is what this meaning is. There is no transfer of power. Transfer of power from British East India Company to the British Crown will happen only after 1857 in the Government of India Act 1858. So don't think that there is transfer of power. It is just that they're giving a statement that British Crown asserts sovereignty of Indian territories managed by the East India Company. Why? Because they're feeling the threat from the Napoleon and there is rampant corruption in the company. So this is the first point. The second is, see, again coming back to this, Napoleon will introduce what you call as continental system. Napoleon will introduce something called continental system. Continental system is nothing but an economic warfare strategy. Economic warfare strategy where he says that Europe should not trade with the British. So when this continental system is introduced, the British merchants will now lose the market in Europe. When the British merchants will lose the market in Europe, they will start demanding from the British Crown. They will start demanding from the British Crown to remove the monopoly of East India Company, on Indian trade. And because of this outcome, the second provision, this is the first provision, the second provision under the Charter Act of 1813 is that the monopoly of trade of the East India Company in India is now removed except trade in tea. And they will also retain trade in China monopoly. But in India, the monopoly of trade of East India Company is removed except trade in tea. So these are the two very, very important structural changes that happens in Charter Act of 1813. Along with this, there are a few pointers that can be important because from 1813, Christian missionaries, third one is Christian missionaries are now allowed to come into India. Okay, that is the third point. The fourth point is educational grant of rupees 1 lakh is given in order to improve the education of the masses. Okay. However, it may look good, but if you see, this entire philosophy was what you call as downward infiltration theory. What is downward infiltration theory? Downward infiltration theory means you have to create a mass of Indians who are Indians in color but British in taste. Okay, you can find more information about this downward infiltration theory, but that educational grant of 1 lakh rupees annually was something that provision was introduced in the Charter Act of 1813. So overall, these were some important points of Charter Act of 1813, but the most important were the first and the second, how structurally things are changing. So I hope you're following it. From 1773 to 1813, what was the evolution that is happening? The next act is Charter Act of 1833, and that becomes very important because it is called climax of centralization. Look at this. Let us go to the next act. The next act is Charter Act of 1833. Look at this. They call it as climax of centralization. Why are they calling it climax of centralization is because now the entire power is taken and put under one person. Look, the centralization started in 1773. How did the centralization start in 1773? In 1773, the centralization started by allowing the governor of Bengal to become Governor General of Bengal. Next, why that person is called Governor General of Bengal is the Governor of Madras and Governor of Bombay are made subsidiary to the Governor of Bengal. Okay, so this is how the centralization started. That is, more powers were given to this person. Now, in 1833, look at this. The first point is the Governor General of Bengal is made the Governor General of India. Okay, the Governor General of Bengal is made the Governor General of India. Now, when they say obviously the Governor General of India, that means all powers of British Indian territories, are vested in the hands of the Governor General of India. When I say all powers, it means civil, it means military And most importantly, look at this, it also means legislative powers. Okay, it also means legislative powers. That means Governor General of India can make laws for the entire British India. Can make laws for the entire British India. Okay, that means the law-making power of the Governor of Bengal, the law-making power of the Governor of Bombay and the law-making power of the Governor of Madras, the law-making power is taken off. Okay, so whatever law-making powers that these people add, that is also taken off and that is given to the Governor General of India. That is why they say this Charter Act of 1833 is the climax of centralization. Okay, this is the one. Now, in 1813, you saw that the merchants were compelling the British Crown to remove the monopoly of trade of the East India Company in India. So, the British Crown had removed the monopoly of trade except tea. Now, they will remove the monopoly completely. So, now East India Company loses the monopoly rights, POLY, monopoly rights completely. So, when the East India Company loses the monopoly rights completely, the East India Company basically becomes purely an administrative body. It becomes purely an administrative body. Okay, that is, it just takes care of the British Indian territories on behalf of the British Crown. That is all it does. So that is why East India Company becomes becomes purely an administrative body. So overall, you understood what exactly is the Charter Act of 1833. It is the climax of centralization in India that started from 1773 and reached its peak in 1833. So now you learned what happened in 1833 and I hope that you're following the evolution from 1773 to 1833. Now let us look at what happens in the Charter Act of 1853. The Charter Act of 1853. Very interesting thing happens here. Look at this. In the Charter Act of 1853, now let us just recollect the governance structure. Look, there was Governor of Bengal in 1773. This Governor of Bengal was made Governor General of Bengal, and this Governor General of Bengal was given an executive council of 4 members. And also you learned that in 1786, the Governor General of Bengal will have some overriding powers. With respect to the decisions taken by the Executive Council. And also in 1833, you understood that this Governor General of Bengal was made the Governor General of India. So you have the Governor General of India, and that Governor General of India also has the Executive Council of 4 members. Okay, so this is the entire evolution that you had learned. Now look at Charter Act of 1853. So you have Governor General of India. And this Governor General of India is having Executive Council of 4 members. So, Executive Council of 4 members will help in the decision making of the Governor General of India. Now, the Governor General of India has civilian powers, military powers, political powers and legislative powers. So, because there is a lot of powers that is vested in the hands of Governor General of India, to create some type of separation of power, what they will do is, now they will create something called Legislative Council under the Governor General of India. See, you have the Executive Council, you also have the Legislative Council. They say that this Legislative Council is in charge of making legislations or laws. So basically what they have done is they have created something called separation of power here itself. So the civil, military and revenue powers are here and the legislative powers or the law making powers are here. So this separation of power is created in Charter Act of 1853. Okay. Now look at this. They say that this Legislative Council that is created under the Governor General of India should have 6 members. And they also say that 4 out of these 6 members must be from local representation. But understand very carefully, it is not Indian representation, it is local representation. What does local representation mean? It means 4 members should come from 4 different provinces. That is, you have Bengal, you have Madras, you have Bombay, and then you have Agra. So this 4 provinces must send one representatives to this particular Legislative Council, and that is what is called as local representation. It does not mean Indian representation. Okay, so basically Legislative Council is created, you have an Executive Council that was there previously. Now this Legislative Council should have 6 members, 4 out of that 6 members are local representation from these provinces, and this Legislative Council is in charge of making laws. This Legislative Council that was started will go on to evolve to become what today we call as Parliament. That is why this Legislative Council is given the name Mini Parliament. This is called Mini Parliament. Okay, and in the future acts, I'll keep telling that this is what is called Indian Legislative Council. This is what is called Indian Legislative Council, or in other words, they also call it as Central Legislative Council. Okay. Now understand that there is nothing called Provincial Legislative Council in this act, because all the law-making powers of the entire British Indian territories are put in Governor General of India. So we have still not started decentralization. Centralization is still at its peak only. Decentralization will come next. So don't get confused. The Central Legislative Council is only the law-making power in this particular British Indian territories for now. Okay, that is something that you should remember. So, but this entire Charter of Act of 1853 is focused on this. That is the Legislative Council. So I hope you understood what exactly is the Legislative Council and how this Legislative Council is created, and next how this Legislative Council will keep evolving. That is very, very important. Okay. Apart from this, if you take Charter Act of 1853, now because they have created all this different governance structure, they'll also create something called open competitive exams. Open competitive exams for the recruitment of civil servants. For the recruitment of civil servants. So basically what they're telling is this competitive exam is open for both covenanted plus non-covenanted. Now understand that in Cornwallis period, that is while I was discussing the Act of 1786, I discussed about how Cornwallis will create two different types of civil service posts. This particular post was kept away from Indians. But this Charter Act of 1853 will open this covenanted civil service post. It is an open competitive exam where Indians can also participate, but though it seems as a very progressive move, but this is just on paper and not in spirit. Okay, this will not be implemented, but theoretically, this provision was given in Charter Act of 1853. Hence, it becomes very important. So, open competitive exams were also held for the recruitment of civil servants in both covenanted as well as non-covenanted posts. So, that is one more important part of Charter Act of 1853. But overall, you understood the evolution of the governance structure in this particular charter. It is very, very important. So, I hope you are clearly following the evolution. Now, you understood what is Charter Act of 1853. Now, we are moving into the Government of India Act 1858. Why from Charter Act we are going into Government of India Act is because one, there is transfer of power from the British East India Company to British Crown after the first war of Indian independence, that is 1857 revolt. Okay. The next, it is called Government of India Act because there is no more East India Company, there is no more Royal Charter. Whatever happens should happen within the British Crown, making structural changes in the governance of the British Indian territories. That is why it is called as Government of India Act of 1858. So let us move to the next one. The next is the Government of India Act of 1858. Okay. Now understand something. This act is given the title. The title is Act of Good Government in India. Act of Good Government in India. Now understand, this is the title, not the interpretation. So don't think that anything that is created here is creating some type of good governance in India. There is nothing like that. It is just that the title given is Act of Good Government in India. Okay, that's all. That is the title of this Government of India Act 1858. But what do they do? Understand that the character of governance, is still one and the same. The character of governance is still one and the same. The only thing they make, or the only thing that this particular act will do is, it will try to change the titles of different officials. Look at this. The first and the most important thing is the transfer of power. So the transfer of power happens from the East India Company to the British Crown. So from this Government of India Act Government of India Act 1858, it is the British Crown that will directly manage the British Indian territories. Okay, it is the British Crown that will directly manage the British Indian territories. So that is the first point. The second point is, how does it directly manage? It will directly manage through a person called Viceroy. Okay, now see, the Governor General of India, the title of Governor General of India is removed and the title of Viceroy is given. Okay, so Lord Canning, who is the last Governor General of India, will become the first Viceroy of India. Okay, so Viceroy, Governor General of India is now changed to Viceroy, and this Viceroy is directly, or this Viceroy is the direct representation. This Viceroy is the direct representation of the British Crown. Viceroy is the direct representation of the British Crown. So that is one. The next is, this act will also create something called Secretary of State. Now, Secretary of State is a department in Britain. It is headed by a member of the British Cabinet, and this particular member, the member of the British Cabinet, will be given a council. This council will be of 15 members. Will be given a council. The council will be of 15 members. So overall, what is this British cabinet member doing? This Secretary of State is the one who will take the decisions. This department or this person will take the decisions, and the decisions taken by the Secretary of State will be implemented by the Viceroy. Implemented by the Viceroy. So this is what is the Secretary of State and Viceroy. So these are the two important posts that are created in the Government of India Act 1858. Apart from this, lesser provisions are there, not that important, but entire governance perspective, these are two things that again changes. And one more thing is, in the same Government of India Act 1858, they say that it is also again reasserting that the civil services are open to the Indians. The civil services are open to the Indians. So basically, this is one more point that they put in the Government of India Act 1858. So these are some important changes that happens post the revolt of 1857, and the changes will not change the character of governance. It will just change the position and the transfer of power. Okay, position with respect to Governor General of India becoming Viceroy, and the position of Secretary of State is introduced. And apart from that, there is transfer of power from the East India Company to the British Crown. So this is what is the Government of India Act 1858. So now you understood what is Government of India Act 1858. From henceforth, they keep calling it Indian Councils Act, because whatever changes that are being made, mainly it is focused on the councils, and that is why they call it Indian Councils Act. So let us go to the next one. The next is the Indian Councils Act 1861. Indian Councils Act 1861. Now look at this. Because the changes are made in the councils, it is mainly called Indian Councils Act 1861. But what is very, very important here is, now the Britishers seek Indian support. The Britishers seek Indian support. So what they do is, from this act, Indian representation in the Legislative Council begins. Indian representation in the Legislative Council begins. Okay, that is a very, very important perspective, or a very important provision of the Indian Councils Act 1861. So Indian representation in the Legislative Council begins. The second is, I had told you that from 1773 to 1833, you had seen centralization. Now, Indian Councils Act 1861 is where you are going to see the start of decentralization. That is, let us now look at it very carefully. So, if you take the Viceroy is nothing but the Governor General of India. So, if you take the Viceroy had the Executive Council. This Executive Council were 4 members. Then this Viceroy also had Legislative Council. This Legislative Council had 6 members. Okay. So, these are the two councils of the Viceroy. Now, Indians are now allowed to be added in the Legislative Council. Okay, that is one. Now, when Indians are allowed to be added in the Legislative Council, they are added as non-official members. The next question is, why are they told as non-official members? Is because they have limited powers. Now, apart from Indians being part of the Legislative Council in the form of non-official members, this Legislative Council was also introduced something called portfolio system. We follow even today the portfolio system, where every minister is given different portfolio. Portfolio means basically departments. Okay, so every minister will be given a particular department, and that concept is what is called as portfolio system. So in the Legislative Council, portfolio system was also introduced. The next is, the Viceroy was given the power to issue ordinances. The Viceroy was given the power to issue ordinances during the times of emergency. So overall, you understood the governance, the structure, how it has changed. And now coming to this start of decentralization, what happens is, remember, 1773 to 1833, Governor General of India has all the powers of all the British Indian territories, including the legislative powers. But in the Indian Councils Act 1861, the legislative powers, that means the law-making powers, are now decentralized to the provinces. The provinces mainly are Bombay, Madras, you have Punjab, and then you have northwest frontier. So these provinces will get back their law-making powers. Now remember, when they get back their law-making powers, all these will have the governors. The governor of the provinces will be there, and these governors will have their own provincial legislative council, provincial legislative council, provincial legislative council, provincial legislative council. So now there are two levels of legislative councils because the power is getting decentralized. There are two levels of legislative council. One is the Central Legislative Council or the Indian Legislative Council. This will make the laws at the central level, and then you have the Provincial Legislative Council. These are the ones that will make the law at the provincial level. So understand that there is Indian Legislative Council or Imperial Legislative Council or Central Legislative Council, and then you have Provincial Legislative Council. So there are two levels that are created. The two levels are created because this is the start of decentralization. So hence, this Indian Councils Act 1861 will not only provide representation to Indians in the Legislative Council, but also will be the start of decentralization in British India. That is why Indian Councils Act of 1861 is very, very important. Now, let us understand the Indian Councils Act of 1892. That is nothing but making changes in this particular architecture. Let us understand that carefully. Look at this. You have the Indian Councils Act of 1892. Look at this. If you have Indian Councils Act of 1892, what are the changes that they make? Now, you know that there is Central Legislative Council and then there is Provincial Legislative Council. Now, the Central Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council as official members plus non-official members. Okay, here also you have official members plus non-official members. So, the first provision of the Indian Councils Act of 1892 is they will increase the members in the Legislative Council. The numbers are not important, so don't worry about the numbers. What they do is they'll increase the members in the Central Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council. But when they increase the members, they will make sure that when they are increasing the members, the official majority is maintained. They will make sure that the official majority is maintained. That is very, very important. Official majority is maintained. This is one thing that you should remember. Though they are increasing the members in both the Legislative Council, but the official majority is maintained. That means the Indian members will be lesser compared to the British and European members. So that is what it means. Official majority will be maintained. So this is the first point. Now, the next is because they are increasing the number of members, they have to give some powers to the non-official members. So the non-official members will be given very little powers. Little powers like they can now discuss budget and they can also ask questions. They can ask questions. Okay. If you see, Surendranath Banerjee and Firoz Shah Mehta are the two important personalities who will make use of this in a much better way if you have read Modern India very well. But anyways, we are not discussing about Modern India now. We are only talking about the Indian Councils Act 1892. So, in the Central Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council, unofficial members will be given some more powers, and that is they can discuss budget and ask questions. Next, for these unofficial members, okay, they will create some type of nomination. They will create some type of nomination. For the Central Legislative Council, the non-official members are selected by the Viceroy from the nominations given by the Provincial Legislative Council and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. Look at this. For the non-official members in the Central Legislative Council, the Viceroy will select the non-official members from the nomination that is given by the Provincial Legislative Council and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. This is for the Central Legislative Council. Now, if you take the non-official members of the Provincial Legislative Council, the governor will select the members. The governor will select the members from the nomination given by the district boards, municipalities, and universities. Look at this. So, why am I telling this in detail is because the non-official members are nominated by a list given by at the central level, Provincial Legislative Council and Bengal Chamber of Commerce. The nomination of non-official members at the Provincial Legislative Council will be selected from the list given by the district boards, municipalities and universities. There is no elections. Elections are not there. So please don't get confused. It is a nomination list given by these two bodies in the Central Legislative Council, given by these three bodies in the Provincial Legislative Council. There is no hint of elections. So please don't get confused. So this is overall the Indian Councils Act 1892. Again, if you are seeing that the changes are being done in the Indian councils, especially the legislative councils. Okay. So I hope you are understanding the evolution of how the governance structure from 1773 is evolving to 1892. Okay, so now you learned what is Indian Councils Act of 1892. Let us go to the next Councils Act. That is also very, very important. The next is the Indian Councils Act. Indian Councils Act of 1909. This is famously called as Minto-Morley reforms. Okay, understand that Minto is the Viceroy and Morley is the Secretary of State. Okay, now what do they do? Again, Indian Councils Act. So whatever changes that happens in the councils. Now you have something called Viceroy. Viceroy will have Executive Council. Viceroy will have Legislative Council. This Legislative Council is also called as Central Legislative Council or Indian Legislative Council. Okay, so here you have official members plus non-official members. Okay, again you have the provinces. In the provinces you have the governor. The governor will have Executive Council. The governor will have Legislative Council. This Legislative Council is called Provincial Legislative Council. Here also you have official members plus non-official members. So overall you understood that this is the structure that is there. This is the structure that we have evolved from 1773 to 1892. However, look at what changes happens in Indian Councils Act 1909. First, in the Central Legislative Council, they'll increase the number of members. In the Provincial Legislative Council also, they'll increase the number of members. So the first point is number of members in the Central Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Council is increased. Number is not important, they just increase it. Second is they will retain official majority. They will retain official majority at the center. They will give up the official majority. So at the provincial level, you will have non-official majority. Okay, so what is the second provision? The second provision is in among the Central Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Council, the official majority is retained only at the center. Only at the center. Okay, so this is about the official majority. Next, look at this. The Viceroy's Executive Council, which add 4 members, they are going to increase the Viceroy's Executive Council from 4 members to 6 members. Okay, so the Viceroy's Executive Council, the number of members will be increased to 6. Now comes the important point. They are increasing the members to 6, and 1 out of that 6 member will be an Indian. So for the first time from 1773 till 1909, for the first time in 1909, one member of the Viceroy's Executive Council, will be an Indian. Okay, can you name who's that first Indian to be part of the Viceroy's Executive Council after the Indian Councils Act 1909? Put this in the comment section. Let us see, are you attentive? Okay, now I know that everyone will know. I just want to know, are you attentive to get to this point and see each and every explanation of mine? That's why I'm asking you this specific question somewhere in the center of my explanation. Okay, but the fourth point is 1 out of the 6 members of the Viceroy's Executive Council should be an Indian. So that is another provision of this Indian Councils Act 1909. But the most important provision that this particular Indian Councils Act brings is what you call as separate electorate. It brings something called separate electorate for Muslims. Look at this. What is separate electorate? Separate electorate is nothing but communal representation for Muslims. Again, what does that mean? That means that for that particular constituency, you will have a Muslim representative. The representative will be a Muslim from a Muslim community representative, and the voters for this representative should also be only Muslim voters. So people who stand for election will also be Muslim. People who vote for that particular person will also be Muslim. This particular scenario or arrangement is what is called as separate electorate. So for the first time, they'll introduce this concept in order to divide and rule. And for that, in order to infuse that division amongst the Hindus as well as the Muslims, they'll create this what you call as separate electorate for Muslims in this Indian Councils Act of 1909. So these are some important provisions of 1909, and I hope that you're following the evolution of how just Governor of Bengal has evolved to create such a big governance structure in India. Okay, so now you have learned the Indian Councils Act 1909. We are moving into the Government of India Act 1919. Look at it. The name changes to Government of India Act 1919 because there is a lot of structural change that they bring now. So listen to this very, very carefully. The next act is the Government of India Act 1919. Now this act is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Again, you should understand Chelmsford is the Viceroy, Montagu is the Secretary of State. Okay. Now, look at this. Again, one more important point is they will remove some powers of the Secretary of State and put it in someone called High Commissioner of London. So, be very, very careful and listen to this carefully. There's a lot of structural changes that happen. The first structural change is they will take the subjects and they will divide the subjects into central subjects, and then they will create something called provincial subject. Provincial subjects. Now, understand that this division that they are doing is not to follow the principles of federalism. It is not to follow the principles of federalism. Understand that this particular act is unitary in nature. It will not change to federal nature. I will tell you the purpose of doing this. But first listen, subjects are divided into central subjects and provincial subjects. When they divide it into central subjects and provincial subjects, also they have to divide the budget into central budget and provincial budget. Central budget and provincial budget. So these are the two things that they do. Now see, why are they doing this is, look at this very, very carefully. You have the Viceroy along with the Executive Council and the Legislative Council, that is called Indian Legislative Council or Central Legislative Council. Okay. And then you have provinces, which is manned by the governor, and in the provinces you have the Executive Council and then you have the Provincial Legislative Council. Okay. Now this is the entire setup that you have. Now look at this. Why are they doing this is, central subjects and provincial subjects is, they will take the provincial subjects, come here, they will take the provincial subjects and they will divide the provincial subjects into two parts. They will say one is known as reserved subjects, another is known as, reserved subjects, another is known as transferred subjects. One is known as reserved subjects, another is known as transferred subjects. Now look at this. Reserved subjects basically are subjects on which the laws are made by the provinces with the governor plus is Executive Council. Whereas if you take the transferred subject, the laws for the transferred subjects are made by the governor with the ministers. The governors with the ministers of the Legislative Council. So, reserved subject is basically done with the Executive Council. Here, this is the reserved subjects. Here, the ministers, along with the ministers are part of this Legislative Council only. So, ministers are here. So, these ministers, along with them, the governor will make laws along with the ministers and on those subjects which are called transferred subjects. Look at this. This division of the subjects into two parts between the Executive Council and the ministers, this is what is called as diarchy. Diarchy. Now, look at this. Diarchy is in a way giving more power to the Britishers only and taking away powers from the Indian legislators because, look at this, reserved subjects. The governor will make the laws on reserved subjects with the Executive Council, and these decisions, the Executive Council and the governor are not responsible to the council, are not responsible to the Legislative Council, that is Provincial Legislative Council. Look at this. The governor and the Executive Council, for whatever laws that they make on the reserved subjects, they are not responsible to the council, or when I say responsible, they are not answerable, they are not accountable. But look at the transferred subjects. Whatever laws that the governor will make along with the ministers on the provincial subjects, on the transferred subjects, I'll repeat again, whatever laws the governor will make along with the ministers on the transferred subjects, for this, the ministers are responsible. They are responsible to the Provincial Legislative Council. Look at this. So, for the transferred subjects, they are making the Indians responsible and accountable and answerable. But for the reserved subjects where the Executive Council with the governor is making the laws, they are not responsible. So, this entire act is what is called as diarchy. So, in the Government of India Act 1919, the first is subjects are divided into two subjects. The second is budget is divided into two budgets. And the third is diarchy is introduced at the provinces. Diarchy is introduced at the provinces. So, I hope you understood what is diarchy. Okay. The fourth one is come to the central level. At the central level, the Executive Council, I told you that in 1909, 1 out of 6 members was Indians. Now they will say 3 out of 6 members should be Indians. Okay. In the Executive Council at the center, there has to be 3 out of 6 members who have to be Indians. So that is one more change that they make. Now, one more thing that they do is at the central level, you have Central Legislative Council. Okay. Now, they will say that at the central level, you should have something called bicameralism. When they say bicameralism, it means instead of just having this Central Legislative Council, now they say, instead of this name, I will tell that there are two houses. There are two houses we have on one side Legislative Assembly, on the other side is Council of States. Look at this. This creating of two houses at the center is what is called as bicameralism. So the next is, the fifth step is, I'll write the fifth step here. The fifth step is bicameralism. Bicameralism is created at the center. Bicameralism is created at the center. Okay. So I hope you understood what are the different structural changes that was brought about in the governance of the British India. So one, subjects are divided into two, budget is divided into two. They introduced something called diarchy at the provinces. They increase the representation of Indians in the Executive Council to 3 out of 6 members in the Viceroy's Executive Council. And the next is bicameralism is created at the center. Apart from this, two minute level introduction is, one, they'll create something called Public Service Commission. Okay. The next, sixth one is, they'll create something called Public Service Commission that can institutionalize the recruitment of civil servants. And the last is, they create something called High Commissioner of London. They create something called High Commissioner of London, and some powers of the Secretary of State are transferred. Some powers of the Secretary of State are transferred to this High Commissioner of London. So from now, from the Act of 1919, the Secretary of State will start losing some powers. So by the time you come to the 1947, the Secretary of State is gone. Okay. So now some powers of the Secretary of State is given to the High Commissioner of London. So overall, you understood what are the important structural changes that happened in the Government of India Act 1919, which is famously called the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Okay. So after understanding the 1919 Act, now it is very important for you to understand 1935 Act. Again, very, very important act from the UPSC exams point of view. So understand this carefully. So you have the Government of India Act 1935. Okay, understand the structural changes that happens. That's why it's called Government of India Act. Look at this. They try to bring what you call as All India Federation. So federalism as a principle starts getting introduced in this act and not in 1919 Act. Okay, so All India Federation. When they say federation, there has to be several units. What are the units? One is British India provinces. British India provinces, and the second is princely states. So they want to bring this different units of princely states and British India provinces and make them as one All India Federation. And when they want to make them as one All India Federation, they will create what you call as the central list, the provincial list, and then you have the concurrent list, provincial list and concurrent list. So this shows the separation of subjects, which is very, very important principle of federalism, Now, apart from central list, provincial list and concurrent list, there is something called residuary powers. Residuary powers means those subjects that are not there in either of the list. This is vested with the Viceroy. So this is the first structural change. Now, you have the provincial level is very, very important. Okay. At the provincial level, look at this. What are the changes that they introduce at provincial level is, in the 1935 Act, one, they abolish diarchy. At the provinces. That is one. The second is, they will introduce bicameralism. I explained what is bicameralism in the previous Act of 1919. Bicameralism was introduced at the center in 1919. Now they will introduce bicameralism even at the provincial level. The next is, they will provide what you call as provincial autonomy. What do you mean by provincial autonomy? Provincial autonomy means when the provinces are making laws on the provincial list, they are autonomous. The central will not interfere in this. That is what is called provincial autonomy. The next is responsible government. What do you mean by responsible government? At the provinces, responsible government means that the governor will act along the aid and advice of his ministers. The governor will act along the aid and advice of his ministers. Remember, this is the bedrock in Article 74 and 75 of Indian Constitution. This is the bedrock. So it is from here that it is getting derived. Anyways, the governor will act along the aid and advice of his minister, and plus they are responsible for the acts made to the legislature. They are responsible to the legislative assembly. That is, whatever acts that the governor and the ministers will do, they are answerable to the legislature They are accountable to the legislature, and hence this creates what we call as responsible government. This is what is Article 74 and 75, the bedrock of parliamentary democracy. Okay, anyways, this is not the discussion. The discussion is basically 1935 Act. So these are some important changes that are done at provincial level. Because of these changes from 1936, the Congress that wins the election will be able to do a lot of good to show the Indians that Indians themselves can govern, Indians themselves can politically administer the Indian territories. However, that again is going into modern India. I don't want to go there. Coming back to Government of India Act 1935, look at this. It is the provincial level that a lot of changes will be done. Then, what will be done at the central level? So, if you take the central level, look at this. At the central level, one, they will introduce diarchy. So, they are basically removing the diarchy from the provinces and they are introducing the diarchy in the central level. This is basically a recommendation given by Simon Commission. But anyways, they will introduce what you call as diarchy at the center. Two, the next thing that they do is, remember I had spoken about Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State had 15-member council. Now, this 15-member council is removed and they will give just a team of advisors. The 15-member council is removed and they will give a team of advisors. Remember, the powers of Secretary of State is started to dilute from 1919 Act. Some powers are given to the High Commissioner of London. Now, they are removing this 15-member council and they will give something called team of advisors to this Secretary of State. So, these are the two changes that happens at the central level. Apart from this, some other pointers that they can ask in the exam is, one, they create, next is they'll create what you call as Federal Public Service Commission plus Provincial Public Service Commission plus Joint Public Service Commission. So, they'll create this three-tier body. And next, they'll also create what you call as the Federal Court. 1937, they create something called Federal Court. And the next, one more small point is they'll also create what you call as Reserve Bank of India. Okay, these are three sub-points that can also be asked in Government of India Act 1935. But overall, you understood what are the different changes that happens at the federal level as well as at the provincial level. Provincial level is very, very important, but overall, these are different provisions of the Government of India Act 1935. Now, after learning all the important evolution of the governance structure, the last comes the Indian Independence Act of 1947. It has less to do with the governance and more to do with creating of the constituent assemblies. Okay, look at this. You have, the next is the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Okay, so here basically one, they will create two dominions. They'll create two dominions. You have one is India and another is Pakistan. So they create two dominions. Next, they'll remove the position of Viceroy. They'll remove this Viceroy and they will appoint Governor General. Governor General. And this Governor General has to act along the aid and advice. Along the aid and advice of the cabinet. Along the aid and advice of the cabinet. So that is the next rule. Okay. The third is they'll also remove this position called Secretary of State. Secretary of State is also not there. The fourth is the British paramountcy. The British paramountcy over the princely states. The British paramountcy over the princely states stands abrogated. Stands abrogated. That means it is void. They are no more, coming under the British paramountcy. So the princely states can choose. The princely states can choose either to join India or Pakistan or remain independent. That is what this Indian Independence Act tells. The next is it creates for the two dominions. The Indian Independence Act creates two constituent assemblies. It creates two constituent assemblies. These constituent assemblies can prepare their own constitution. They can prepare their own constitution, and this constituent assemblies will also have the power to repeal. They'll have the power to repeal all the previous acts. All the previous acts, including the Indian Independence Act itself. Okay, so these are some important provisions. Overall, this Indian Independence Act 1947 declares India to be declared as a sovereign nation. To be declared as a sovereign nation on August 15th, 1947. So with that, we get our independence and India becomes a sovereign nation. So this is the evolution of the governance structure from the Regulating Act of 1773 to the Indian Independence Act of 1947. So from the governor of Bengal, how that governor became governor general, from there how executive council was created, how the legislative council was created, how the capacity was increased, how the powers were given, how the powers were further distributed, how the powers were divided with the help of diarchy. These are some evolutionary approach that you should be very, very clear when you are learning the acts from 1773 to 1947. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Not only did you learn the most important part of your upcoming UPSC prelims exam, but also you understood an approach called evolutionary approach that you can use in order to understand and recollect the content that you will prepare for this exam. Thank you so much for all the love and support, guys. Please don't forget to comment and please don't forget to share this video with as many people as possible. I'll see you again. Bye.